Good morning. I'm Brian Curtis.
And I'm Doug Krisner. Here are the stories we're following today.
So, during trading yesterday, we had the yield on the 10-year JGB get up to 95.5 basis points. And of course, the yen had strengthened a lot during the day. And this kind of fell apart after the BOJ announcement. Let's take a closer look here. The BOJ maintained its negative policy rate. And after the meeting, the BOJ said it would take a more flexible approach to controlling yields on 10-year government debt, saying the 1% level was now a reference point. Well, we got some reaction from Jesper Kohl, who's expert director at Monex Group, Japan.
They've kept the anchor at zero at the front end, but the long-term interest rates are now gradually allowed to be going up. They've had a hard cap. Today's decision means they have a soft cap. So it's like a teacher that is no longer controlling, but that is supervising its students, which are the bond markets here themselves.
So let's look at some of the other news after the bell. We heard today from Advanced Micro Devices, and the company gave a lackluster forecast for revenue. This would be for the current quarter. So we're talking total top line now between 5.8 to 6.4 billion. The company did cite lower demand for gaming, and AMD is also expecting continued weakness in demand for chips in the so-called embedded market. This would be things like automotive or networking systems. Here is Angelo Zeno, senior equity analyst at CFRA Research.
In terms of the outlook, it's definitely a little bit light relative to where expectaxions are. And then, I think that another key area and unknown is on that embedded side. I think that's just largely the Xilinx acquisition that they bought in the first half of last year. And when you kind of look at that business, there's definitely some pressure that looks like it is arising here.
That's Angelo Zeno from CFRA Research. By the way, AMD shares have been chopping around here in the late U.S. session, right now essentially flat. This stock is up 52% so far this year. Brian?
Well, Tesla shares going the other direction, Doug, wiping out nearly a fifth of their value, or some $130 billion in market cap, as demand for electric vehicles wanes. Tesla shares are down roughly 17% since the company reported its third quarter earnings less than 2 weeks ago. And as Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow notes, demand for cars might not be the only factor impacting the stock.
Is this interest rates showing up in the real world? Is this interest rates kind of showing that those early adopters for EVs have been and gone, and that the everyday person who's confronted with a choice to buy an electric vehicle is saying, not right now? And, broadly, that in line with demand is the question the market's posing right now.
That's Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. Separately, Tesla did get a bit of good news today when a jury in California ruled that the company's autopilot technology was not responsible for a crash that killed a driver 4 years ago. Doug?
WeWork is reportedly planning to file for bankruptcy maybe as early as next week. The Wall Street Journal says WeWork may file its Chapter 11 petition in New Jersey. Now, WeWork has been holding conversations with creditors about improving its balance sheet and taking steps to rationalize its real estate footprint. On Monday, the company entered into a forbearance agreement with creditors. This will end in 7 days. Now, a spokesperson for WeWork said, quote, "We don't comment on speculation."
FTX co-founder Sam Bankman-Fried has concluded testifying in his fraud trial. Bloomberg's Tony Ahrens said that the judge grew increasingly frustrated with Bankman-Fried as cross-examination wore on.
Generally, he was admonished for not answering the question directly or trying to reframe the question. And Judge Kaplan got very tired of that. Yesterday, he started out fairly well on that, but by the late afternoon, he had been admonished over a half dozen times, and that just continued today.
That's Bloomberg's Tony Ahrens. Closing arguments are set for Wednesday. The jury could get the case by Thursday afternoon.
We go to China next, where the People's Bank of China is expected later today to inject more liquidity into money markets. This would follow a big surge in interest rates on Tuesday in China. We have more on the story from Bloomberg's Joanne Wong in Hong Kong.
A source close to the PBOC says the central bank will likely inject added liquidity into money markets. The move comes as state media blamed unidentified financial institutions for disturbing the market. The source says rates will likely retreat toward levels used in the PBOC's regular open market operations. A report by CCTV had blamed some institutions for depending too much on rollover financing and creating liquidity risks. Funding costs in China's money markets have shot up in recent weeks due to large amounts amounts of government bond issuance and tax payments. The source said overall, liquidity in the banking system is relatively abundant. In Hong Kong, I'm Joanne Wong, Bloomberg Radio.
Now it's time for global news. Israel is saying that its ground offensive into Gaza is going very well. Ed Baxter has that story and more from the 960 newsroom in San Francisco. Ed?
Yeah, that's right, Brian. It says it's systematically dismantling Hamas. IDF Lieutenant Colonel John Kornika says that Hamas is no match for Israeli troops.
This operation was, of course, the result of meticulous intelligence collection, planning, and execution on the ground, done together with the IDF and the ISA, our equivalent of FBI.
Meanwhile, Hamas says it will release a number of captives within days. This, as reports, dozens of people killed and wounded at a Gaza refugee camp, victims of a series of Israeli airstrikes. Israel command says it's a large Hamas infrastructure. It's targeted and killed a senior leader. Meanwhile, Egypt says it's ready to allow more humanitarian aid trucks through the Rafah border. And U.S. aid to Israel and Ukraine front and center in Congress today. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in front. Blinken saying aid for both needs to go forward now.
If we start to peel off pieces of this package, they'll see that. They'll understand that we are playing whack-a-mole while they cooperate increasingly and pose an ever greater threat to our security as well as to that of allies and partners.
And Austin says it helps U.S. production.
When we send our friends munitions from our stockpiles, the money to replenish our supplies strengthens our military readiness, and we invest in American industry and American workers. That also holds true for funding for Israel or Ukraine to procure new equipment off the production line.
Now, new House Speaker Michael Johnson says the Israeli money will be taken from IRS enforcement.
They have about $67 billion in that fund, and we'll try to take the 14.5 necessary for this immediate and urgent need. We'll deal with the rest of that issue later.
Which Bloomberg government reporter Jack Fitzpatrick says that's not going to work.
For Democrats in the Senate, it's a non-starter. Chuck Schumer, Ben Cardin, a variety of Democrats have said absolutely that is not happening.
So all funding has been slowed. Meanwhile, the Senate has confirmed Jack Lew to be the nation's ambassador to Israel. Lew expected to play a major role in the Biden policy in the region. President Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping will have a face-to-face meeting next month. White House spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre says it will be a difficult situation and conversation.
That's what the president is going to be doing, and having, a tough conversation, but important conversation.
Yeah, Pierre says wouldn't go into details on expectations. It'll be on the sidelines of APEC here in San Francisco. And the U.S. military says that it's going to buy fish from Japan's Fukushima area for military food. Ambassador Rahm Emanuel says a dual purpose for the purchase.
The best way we have proven in all the instances to kind of wear out China's economic coercion is come to the aid and assistance of the targeted country or industry.
Emanuel says a bulk buy. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Asia. I'm Brian Curtis, along with Rashad Salamat, and our guest is Larry Liebert, Bloomberg editor on the International Economics and Security team, with a closer look at the Israel-Hamas war. Larry, thanks very much for taking out the time to be with us. So the Rafah border crossing is set to open today on the Wednesday to let wounded Palestinians leave. And Egypt says it will allow more aid trucks in and take more wounded prisoners out. This would seem to be a fairly major development.
It would be if it all occurs as planned. There's been a lot of frustration on all sides, really, about the volume of aid, about the ability to use the crossing because you have so many players. You not only have Egypt, which is cautious about taking in anyone on their side, and you have Israel, which feels it has to inspect every truck. But there clearly is a need for the humanitarian aid. All sides agree in principle it'll be significant if that starts to deliver.
So, while we do that, we've also got the United States as well as Israel just seeing the possibility of perhaps using peacekeepers on the Gaza Strip once Israel fulfills or perhaps thinks it's fulfilled its goals of eradicating Hamas from the territory.
Yes, our reporters Peter Martin and Jennifer Jacobs broke a story that the administration is starting to talk privately and cautiously about what would happen if Hamas is indeed destroyed, as Israel vows. Who would then run the Gaza Strip? And people in the administration are very quietly talking about options, including a multinational force. It would even involve American troops or some sort of UN supervision. The problem being that there is no obvious successor to Hamas, which has governed the Gaza Strip for years now.
Yeah, yet at the same time, the U.S. is sending 300 more troops to the Middle East. What's the nature of that deployment?
Well, I think they made clear they are not going to Israel. They sent 900 earlier, now 300 more to bolster the American presence in the region generally. And I think that's aimed mostly at the increase in drone and other attacks by Iran-backed militias in the region. The U.S. wants a greater show of force and to be able to respond there. So they're emphasizing that presence, but saying that those American troops aren't going into Israel.
Tell me something here, Larry. Is it now perhaps, given the mood music and the noise coming out of the territory, or should I say the region, that the chances of a wider conflict, because you just did mention Iran, perhaps are receding?
Perhaps, and yet, it could all blow up yet. There is some sense that Qatar is playing a mediator's role, as it often tries to do, that Iran, while making threats, may not be eager to expand this war. If they did, it would be by backing attacks by Hezbollah in the north, but also perhaps attacking U.S. interests in the Gulf. So that's still there, but at the moment, it appears that this is not widening beyond the very fierce fighting going on in Gaza.
Israel said that it killed a senior leader of Hamas and targeted Hamas infrastructure. I think Israel is saying that it wants to eliminate or to rid the Gaza Strip of Hamas. What does that mean? Would it be like cutting off the head of the snake, or do they want the entire snake?
Well, they want the entire snake, in that they feel that there is such a broad presence of Hamas that they need to make it destroyed as an effective fighting force and a threat in the future. Now, one of the problems, again, they said they killed a senior leader today, but on the other hand, in Gaza, there are reports that dozens were killed and wounded in an attack at a refugee camp. And this is the challenge in that very clearly that Hamas permeates Gaza, and Hamas fighters very significantly, very purposefully exist among the civilians. And so that gives Israel a very tough challenge in terms of human rights and the rights of civilians in warfare. It is interesting that the U.S. is increasing the mood music now, saying we back Israel, they need to do what they're going to do, but they really have to protect human rights. I was just noting what used to be called a tweet from Matthew Miller of the State Department spokesman just now. It simply said, protecting civilians from harm and getting them humanitarian assistance is vital to Israel's security, period. So that emphasis is being increased, even as the U.S. says Israel needs to do what it has to do in terms of destroying Hamas, and that tension is growing.
Just briefly, a UN envoy for Syria said that this was already spilling over into Syria. In 30 seconds or so, what's happening there?
Well, I think we're seeing some, again, because the Iranian support, we're seeing some activity there. We're seeing activity elsewhere in the region. And the tensions are there. As you mentioned, there doesn't, at least for today, there seems to be a little easing off. Some of that is determined by what Iran decides to do.
Yeah, all right, Larry. Thanks so much. It's a big question. Yeah, very big question. Larry Lieber joining us, a Bloomberg editor. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Asia, your morning brief on the stories making news from Hong Kong to Singapore and Wall Street.
Look for us on your podcast feed every day on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each day on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Brian Curtis.
And I'm Doug Krisner. Join us again tomorrow for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.